While Canada's greatest songwriter created timeless ballads about love and loss, his own children lived through decades of family turmoil, mysterious disappearances from public life, and the complex burden of a famous father's legacy. From a daughter who changed his most personal lyrics, to a son who found success in electronic music under an assumed identity, their stories reveal the hidden costs of musical fame. Here's what really happened to Gordon Lightfoot's children. Fred Lightfoot. Of all Gordon Lightfoot's 6 children, Fred Lightfoot has become the most elusive figure, disappearing so completely from public view that his life remains one of the most intriguing mysteries in Canadian music history. Born on February 1, 1964, Fred was Gordon's first child with his Swedish wife Britta Ingegerd Olausson, arriving during what should have been the happiest period of the legendary songwriter's early career. Fred grew up in the shadow of his father's rising fame, watching as Gordon Lightfoot transformed from a struggling folk singer into one of Canada's most celebrated musicians throughout the 1960s and 70s. As the eldest child, Fred witnessed firsthand the turbulent breakdown of his parents' marriage, which became the inspiration for some of his father's most famous songs, including "If You Could Read My Mind." The family's private struggles played out against the backdrop of Gordon's increasing success, creating a complex childhood environment where personal pain became public art. When Fred was just 9 years old, his parents divorced in 1973 after a highly publicized court battle where Gordon admitted to adultery. The divorce proceedings made headlines across Canada, with Britta receiving custody of Fred and his younger sister Ingrid, along with $4,500 in monthly child support and $150,000 for a new home. These were substantial amounts of money at the time, ensuring that Fred and his sister would have financial security even as their family structure crumbled. Despite growing up with one of Canada's most recognizable surnames and having access to the music industry through his father's connections, Fred made the remarkable decision to completely withdraw from public life. Unlike his siblings, who have occasionally appeared in media coverage or pursued careers that brought them some public attention, Fred has maintained an almost supernatural level of privacy for decades. His educational background, career path, romantic relationships, and even his current location remain completely unknown to the public. This extreme privacy becomes even more striking when considering that Fred is now nearly 60 years old and has successfully avoided any media coverage, social media presence, or public appearances for his entire adult life. Even during significant family events, including his father's major health scares and eventual death in May 2023, Fred managed to remain completely out of the spotlight. His absence from public records and media coverage is so complete that it appears to be a deliberate and sustained effort to live entirely away from his father's fame. The tragedy in Fred's story deepened in June 2005 when his mother Britta passed away at Scarborough General Hospital from complications related to a stroke. She was 69 years old and had maintained her own private life after her divorce from Gordon, focusing on her children and grandchildren. Britta's death meant that Fred lost the parent who had raised him and protected his privacy throughout his childhood, leaving him as one of the few remaining connections to Gordon's early family life. According to family records, Britta was survived by 3 grandchildren, including Fred's own children, though their identities and current circumstances remain as mysterious as their father's life. Fred's complete withdrawal from public life has extended to protecting his own family's privacy, creating a multi-generational pattern of avoiding the spotlight that once defined his father's existence. Today, Fred Lightfoot remains Gordon Lightfoot's most enigmatic child, a man who has successfully lived an entirely private life despite carrying one of Canada's most famous names. Ingred Lightfoot. Ingrid Lightfoot became the most outspoken of Gordon Lightfoot's children when she took the extraordinary step of directly confronting her famous father about his songwriting and demanding changes to one of his most personal Compositions. Born on December 31, 1965, Ingrid was Gordon's second child with his first wife, Britta Ingegerd Olaison, arriving during a period when her parents' marriage was already showing serious cracks that would eventually inspire some of her father's most famous songs. Growing up in the aftermath of her parents' highly publicized divorce in 1973, Ingrid developed a unique perspective on her father's music that differed dramatically from his millions of fans around the world. While audiences heard beautiful, melancholic ballads about lost love and relationship struggles, Ingrid heard painful reminders of her family's private turmoil and her father's admitted infidelities that had destroyed her childhood home. This personal connection to Gordon's music would eventually lead to one of the most remarkable instances of a child directly influencing their parents' artistic legacy. The pivotal moment came when Ingrid approached her father about his signature song, "If You Could Read My Mind," which Gordon had written during the breakdown of his marriage to her mother. The original lyrics included the line, "I'm just trying to understand the feelings that you lack," placing the blame for the relationship's failure squarely on Britta. Ingrid, who had witnessed the marriage from a child's perspective and understood the complexity of her parents' problems, boldly told her father that this wasn't accurate or fair. She insisted that their parents' failed marriage was a two-way street and demanded that he change the lyric to "the feelings that we lack" to reflect shared responsibility for what went wrong. This confrontation required tremendous courage from Ingrid, as she was essentially challenging one of Canada's most respected songwriters about his own artistic interpretation of his life. Gordon, to his credit, listened to his daughter's perspective and made the change, acknowledging that she had provided important insight that he had missed due to his emotional proximity to the situation. He later admitted in interviews that the difficulty with writing songs inspired by personal stories was that there wasn't always the emotional distance and clarity needed to make improvements like the one his daughter had suggested. Ingrid's influence on her father's music extended beyond this single lyric change, as she also expressed strong feelings about other songs that referenced her mother. She particularly disliked "For Lovin' Me," which she felt was disrespectful to Britta's memory, saying it made her angry because she knew it was about her mom and served as an embarrassing reminder of Gordon's affairs with multiple women. Her criticism was so pointed that Gordon eventually stopped performing the song and admitted he could no longer bear listening to it himself. Unlike her siblings, who have largely avoided public attention, Ingrid chose to build a life centered around helping others through her work as an art teacher and her dedication to animal rights advocacy. She has developed what she describes as an unwavering love and compassion for animals, and now works actively to protect them, having found a way to channel her caring nature into meaningful work that reflects her values. Ingrid has also created her own family, becoming the mother of 2 children who have given her a different perspective on parent-child relationships. Her daughter Amber was born in July 1986 and works for the Toronto Transit Commission after earning a degree in Arts and Contemporary Studies from Ryerson University. Amber married a man named Brad in 2014, though the marriage later ended, and she is now romantically involved with someone named Joey while raising 2 children of her own. Ingrid's son Johnny attended Stouffville District Secondary School, the same institution where his grandfather Gordon had once been a student, creating an interesting generational connection to the family's history in the Toronto area. Galen McGee. Galen McGee represents one of the most mysterious chapters in Gordon Lightfoot's family story, emerging from the 16-year period when the legendary musician remained unmarried following his divorce from his first wife, Britta. Born around 1975 during this turbulent time in Gordon's personal life, Galen's very existence became the subject of speculation and questions that would follow him throughout his life, largely due to the fact that he carries a completely different surname than his famous father. The circumstances surrounding Galen's birth occurred during one of the most complicated periods of Gordon Lightfoot's personal life, when the singer was navigating his newfound freedom after his highly publicized divorce, while simultaneously dealing with his struggles with alcohol and the temptations that came with his celebrity status. During this 16-year stretch of being unmarried, Gordon had relationships with various women. And it was from one of these relationships that Galen was born, though the identity of his mother has never been publicly revealed or confirmed. The question of Galen's paternity became a persistent issue precisely because of his surname McGee, which differs so dramatically from the Lightfoot name that fans and media observers initially wondered whether he was actually Gordon's biological child. This confusion was compounded by the fact that Gordon himself maintained relative silence about his children from this period of his life, preferring to keep his family matters private, even as his professional career continued to flourish throughout the 1970s and 80s. However, multiple sources and family records eventually confirmed that Galen is indeed Gordon Lightfoot's son, despite the different last name that has caused decades of confusion among those trying to piece together the musician's family tree. The reason for the different surname likely relates to his mother's identity and personal circumstances, though these details have remained carefully guarded family secrets that neither Gordon nor Galen have ever chosen to discuss publicly. During the 1990s, when Galen would have been in his late teens and early 20s, he was reportedly living in Los Angeles and pursuing his education as a student. This period represents virtually the only time when any concrete information about Galen's life and whereabouts became publicly known, suggesting that even then, he was beginning to establish the pattern of extreme privacy that would define his adult years. The fact that he chose to live and study in Los Angeles, rather than remaining in Canada near his father's home base in Toronto, suggests either a desire for independence or perhaps a deliberate attempt to create distance from his father's fame and the complications it brought to his life. Now 50 years old, Galen has successfully maintained what can only be described as complete privacy about virtually every aspect of his adult life, including his career, relationships, family status, and current location. Unlike some of his siblings, who have occasionally appeared in media coverage or maintained some connection to their father's public life, Galen has managed to live entirely outside the spotlight, despite carrying the genetic legacy of one of Canada's most celebrated musicians. The level of privacy that Galen has maintained is particularly remarkable when considering the intense public interest in Gordon Lightfoot's family life and the fact that fans and media have spent decades trying to piece together information about all of the singer's children. Even during major family events, including Gordon's serious health problems in the early 2000s and his eventual death in May 2023, Galen managed to remain completely absent from any public coverage or family statements, suggesting a deliberate and sustained commitment to living his life entirely away from his father's celebrity status. Ingred Lightfoot. Ingred Lightfoot chose to forge his own musical path in a completely different direction from his famous father, ultimately finding unexpected success in Toronto's underground electronic music scene, where he could establish his artistic identity without the burden of the Lightfoot legacy. Born on December 30th, 1981, during another of Gordon's relationships between his first and second marriages, Ingred grew up with a clear understanding that he wanted to create music that bore no resemblance to the folk songs that had made his father a Canadian icon. Unlike his siblings, who largely avoided the music industry altogether, Ingred embraced his musical inheritance, but deliberately chose to express it through genres that could not have been more different from Gordon's acoustic folk ballads. During his late teenage years in the early 2000s, Ingred made the conscious decision to start an alternative band in Toronto, marking the beginning of what would become a fascinating parallel musical career that ran alongside his father's continued success in traditional folk and country music. Ingred's most significant musical achievement came through his role as the drummer for Madrid, an electronic music group that formed in Toronto in 2003 with Adam Perry on guitars, keys, and vocals, and Duncan Christie on bass, keys, and vocals. The band's sound represented a bold departure from anything associated with the Lightfoot name, combining elements of electro, shoegaze, and psychedelia to create what critics would describe as a unique and innovative approach to electronic music that captured attention both in Canada and internationally. Madrid's debut album, Warm Waters, was released in 2003 on the record label Aporia and immediately drew critical acclaim that extended far beyond Canada's borders. The album, which featured analog synthesizer music that created atmospheric and experimental soundscapes, caught the attention of the BBC Music website, where it received the memorable praise of being described as the indie record boards of Canada never made. This comparison to the highly respected Scottish electronic music duo represented significant recognition for Eric and his bandmates, as Boards of Canada were considered pioneers in the electronic music world and had influenced countless artists with their distinctive sound. The success of Warm Waters demonstrated that Eric had successfully established his own musical credibility entirely separate from his father's reputation, though the irony was not lost on observers that both father and son had achieved recognition from the BBC for their respective musical contributions. After a 4-year gap, Madrid released an EP titled First Message, showing that the band maintained their creative momentum and continued to develop their sound in the electronic music scene. When Eric was 18 years old and still developing his musical identity, his father Gordon spoke about him in interviews with evident pride, but also clear recognition that his son was pursuing a completely different artistic vision. Gordon explained to reporters that Eric was starting an alternative band in Toronto and made it clear that there was no expectation or desire for Eric to continue the family's folk music tradition. When asked whether Eric was interested in playing his father's music, Gordon's response was direct and supportive, saying that his son was not into that kind of trip and was instead focused on developing his own trip. This deliberate separation from his father's musical style represented Eric's successful effort to establish himself as a musician in his own right, creating electronic soundscapes and alternative music that allowed him to build a career based entirely on his own artistic merits rather than trading on the recognition that came with carrying the Lightfoot surname. Miles Lightfoot. Miles Lightfoot has achieved what might be the most complete separation from public life of any of Gordon Lightfoot's children, managing to live so privately that virtually no information about his adult existence has ever been documented or shared with the outside world. Born in 1991 to Gordon's second wife, Elizabeth Moon, during what should have been a stable period in the musician's personal life, Miles represents the second youngest of Gordon's 6 children, and yet remains perhaps the most enigmatic figure in the entire family. Miles came into the world during Gordon's second marriage, which began in 1989 when the legendary songwriter finally decided to remarry after spending 16 years as a bachelor following his divorce from his first wife, Brita. His mother, Elizabeth Moon, provided Gordon with what appeared to be a more stable family environment than he had experienced during his turbulent first marriage, and Miles grew up alongside his younger sister Meredith in what Gordon described as a more normal family setting than his earlier children had experienced. Despite being born into a period when Gordon had achieved legendary status in Canadian music and had gained international recognition for songs like The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald and If You Could Read My Mind, Miles seems to have made a deliberate choice to avoid any connection to his father's fame or public recognition. This decision becomes even more remarkable when considering that he grew up during the height of the internet age, when maintaining complete privacy requires extraordinary effort and careful planning. Now 33 years old, Miles has successfully maintained such complete separation from public attention that basic details about his life remain entirely unknown to the outside world. Unlike his siblings, who have occasionally appeared in family photos, given interviews, or had their career choices documented in media coverage, Miles has managed to avoid any public documentation of his educational background, career path, romantic relationships, or current living situation. The level of privacy that Miles has achieved is particularly striking when compared to the experiences of his younger sister Meredith, who chose to pursue a music career and has given interviews about growing up with Gordon as a father. While Meredith has found ways to honor their father's legacy while maintaining her independence as an artist, Miles appears to have chosen complete disconnection from any aspect of public life that might connect him to the Lightfoot name or musical heritage. This extreme privacy extends to major family events and milestones that typically draw family members together and create opportunities for public documentation. Even during significant moments in Gordon's later life, including his serious health problems in the early 2000s, his various awards and honors, and ultimately his death in May 2023, Miles managed to remain completely absent from any media coverage, family statements, or public acknowledgments. The fact that Miles has maintained this level of privacy, despite living in an era of social media, digital documentation, and constant connectivity, suggests a sustained and deliberate effort that goes far beyond simply preferring to stay out of the spotlight. His ability to avoid any online presence, professional documentation, or accidental public appearances indicates a lifestyle choice that prioritizes complete anonymity over any potential benefits that might come from his connection to one of Canada's most celebrated musicians. Even basic biographical information that typically becomes public knowledge through school records, employment documentation, or social connections remains entirely unavailable, creating a situation where Miles Lightfoot exists as little more than a name in his father's family history. With no publicly available details about who he has become as an adult, or what direction his life has taken. Meredith Moon. Meredith Moon became the only one of Gordon Lightfoot's 6 children to follow in her father's musical footsteps. But she did so with an extraordinary commitment to establishing her own artistic identity that led her to reject the famous family name and insist on complete independence from her father's legendary status. Born to Gordon's second wife, Elizabeth Moon, Meredith made the remarkable decision early in her career to perform under her mother's maiden name rather than capitalizing on the recognition that would have come with being known as Meredith Lightfoot. This choice to distance herself from her father's name required tremendous courage and confidence, as it meant giving up the immediate recognition and opportunities that would have been available to her as the daughter of Canada's most celebrated songwriter. When asked about this decision in interviews, Meredith explained that she chose to build her career on her own merits because of the obvious, meaning she wanted to avoid any suggestion that her success came from nepotism rather than her own talent and hard work. Gordon fully supported his daughter's decision to forge her own path, famously saying, "No nepotism there," when discussing her choice to use her mother's name professionally. This support extended to their rare public performances together, where Gordon made a point of never mentioning their family relationship to audiences. Even when Meredith opened for him during his August and October 2022 tour dates, Gordon would simply introduce her to crowds by saying, "Give it up for Meredith Moon," without any reference to their father-daughter connection. The irony of this arrangement was that both Meredith and Gordon understood the value of her maintaining complete artistic independence, even though it meant that many audience members had no idea they were witnessing a father and daughter sharing the stage together. Meredith later reflected on these performances with gratitude, explaining that her father completely understood and respected why she wanted to establish herself without trading on the family name, and that his discretion during their concerts was really nice. Meredith's musical career has shown steady progress and growing recognition based entirely on her own artistic merits. She released her second album, Constellations, in March 2023, which landed her a global record deal and positioned her for broader international success. Her music represents her own unique artistic vision, rather than an attempt to recreate or build upon her father's folk legacy, demonstrating that her commitment to independence has allowed her to develop her own creative voice. The 2022 tour dates, where Meredith opened for Gordon, turned out to be among the last performances of his legendary career, as his declining health soon forced him to cancel the remainder of his 2023 tour schedule. This makes their time sharing the stage together particularly poignant, representing both a professional collaboration between two independent artists and a private family moment between father and daughter. Following Gordon's death in May 2023, Meredith has been remarkably open about the ongoing impact of losing her father, both as a family member and as someone who had finally begun performing with him professionally. Speaking more than a year after his passing, she revealed the depth of the family's continued grief, explaining that, "My family and I are still just trying to learn a new way of living without him. A lot of us are still grieving, and I think we always will." Despite this loss, Meredith has continued her musical career and has taken on the responsibility of helping to fulfill one of Gordon's final wishes by participating in tribute concerts that celebrate his musical legacy while maintaining her own artistic independence.